Hi, everyone. This week, I thought I would provide feedback through a video. There's a lot of information regarding your mini project that was due last week, where you had to look at 6 different positions and then determine whether or not they should be exempt from overtime or non-exempt from overtime. Now, some of these are pretty straightforward. We'll go ahead and discuss those. There were a couple that could have gone either way, so it'll depend on how you defend that answer. It really depends on the job description, and the job description in some of these was not very clear, and that was actually by design to have you think, okay, wait a minute, depending on this position will depend on if they're hourly or salary. How can I determine that? So let's look at the first one, business development manager. So this employee will be going to potential customers and requesting their business. When I look at the FLSA exemption fact sheet that basically says everyone is to be paid hourly unless they fall on this exemption list. So that particular one, the business development manager, if you look at the job description, sounds like a salesperson because they are trying to get new business. So when you go to the outside sales exemption, it falls under that. The primary duty is to make sales calls. Now his title or her title is not sales per se, but it's a business development manager position, but it is a sales type job. And so this position would be exempt from overtime based on the outside sales exemption. The next position is administrative assistant. Now, an administrative assistant, I'll be honest, it can go either way. It just depends on the job description and actually how much they get paid. So let's take a look at the administrative assistant exemption. So in order for an administrative assistant to be classified as exempt from overtime, meaning their salary, there are 3 things that their job has to meet. Number one, they have to get paid more than $684 a week. Now, we don't know how much this position is being paid. It says at least $30,000, but $684 is actually closer to $35,000. And that was by design. I did that on purpose. So that $30,000 really was just kind of something I threw in there just to see if that would make you think a little bit more, but we don't know how much they're getting paid, do we? So at that rate, we got to skip the first bullet. So then if you look at the second and third bullet where it says the employee's primary duties must be performed directly related to management, general business operations, they must have some sort of independent discretion. They have to make decisions and use their judgment with respect to significant matters. Now, depending on that position of the administrative assistant, they could be considered exempt. However, in this case, if you look at this job description, it says administrative assistant. This employee greets visitors, answers phones, and orders supplies. Unfortunately, that job description does not meet the criteria for that person to be exempt. So that person is not exempt from overtime. Manufacturing manager is next. The manufacturing manager falls under the executive exemption. When you read the different descriptions here, you can see why. But basically, they have they work for full-time employees, they're hiring, they're firing, etc. All right, so we already know that the salesperson can qualify for an exemption because we saw that right here, the outside sales rep. The assembly technician. So the assembly technician falls under the blue collar worker. So in order for a blue collar worker like assembly technician to be exempt from overtime, there has to be some sort of reason that they would apply to that. Here, according to the FLSA, exemptions do not apply to manual laborers or blue collar workers, regardless of the position. So it could be a mechanic, a carpenter, a factory worker. They're all to be paid hourly no matter what. So they are not exempt from overtime. So this last one, it could go either way. It depends on how you answer the question. All right, so the engineer can or cannot get overtime based on their job description. So if the engineer is doing manual labor, for instance, right here, you can see it says, where is it? workers who perform involving repetitive operations with their hands, physical skill, and energy, they do not get an exemption. So they get paid hourly. And even mentions engineers here, operating engineers. But here's the trick. here's the thing that throws some people off. And I did this vague on purpose. You have to really use your critical thinking skills here. It says engineer, this employee will work on new product design. So depending on how you explained yourself will depend on if you get this answer correct, because technically that position could fall under computers. So if you look, it doesn't have to necessarily be computers per se. It can be anyone in the design or software, systemal functions, etc. If you look at these different things, prototypes related to user design. So there is no right or wrong answer. It just depends on how you defended your answer. So if you said the engineer is exempt from overtime because they are making testing and creating modifications, prototypes, then yes, you got that answer correct. I will give you credit for that. If you said the engineer is not, does not get an exemption for overtime, that they should be paid a wage and a half because you said, well, they're a blue collar worker, they're using their hands and their physical energy, then yes, that's correct too. So it really depends on how you answered for that engineer. It could go either way. That position was very vague on purpose. I wanted to see what your thoughts were on as to why that person should be paid overtime or why that person should not be paid overtime. Because again, depending on that job, it could go either way. So let's go ahead and wrap that up real quick. Business development manager, exempt from overtime. Administrative assistant, non-exempt. Manufacturing manager, exempt. Salesperson, exempt. Assembly technician, non-exempt. And then the engineer could go either way. There's no right or wrong. There's only a well-explained answer. So hopefully you were able to explain why that engineer should be exempt or non-exempt. Part 2 was to write a letter. And I'll go ahead and say, as long as you explained yourself and rationalized yourself, then you will get full credit for that. All right, I hope you enjoyed this week's assignment. I know I always find it very fascinating to look at these and kind of, I find these types of assignments more like a puzzle piece and figuring out, you know, should this person be paid overtime? Should they not? Again, it's very relevant to how the business world works today. Thank you so much.